This is video number 13 in our study of the book of Revelation. And in the last video, we read chapter 15 and 16. In this video, we're going to read chapter 17. So we left off regarding the seven bowls of God's great wrath. Those are going to occur after the resurrection has taken place and the wicked remain. One of the seven angels who had the seven bowls came and said to me, "Come, I will show you the punishment of the great prostitute, who sits by many waters. With her the kings of the earth committed adultery, and the inhabitants of the earth were intoxicated with the wine of her adulteries." What is wine? Look at your book, your little notepad, and it should say, you should have written down that wine is doctrine. Adulteries mean that you are committing adultery against Christ with his enemy, the devil, in the world. So this is the wine of her adulteries, the doctrines that the world, that she has basically supposedly combined Christianity with the doctrines of the world. Pagan doctrines, false gods, pagan holidays, a pagan calendar that all of us go along with, a counterfeit Sabbath, additions to the scroll. These are all adulteries with the world. It means that nation that was supposed to be set apart to be holy to God and hold on to his truth stepped outside of his truth. And anytime that we've done that, he has brought his wrath. We were never supposed to step outside of his truth. We were never supposed to adapt pagan customs and traditions, ways of treating the body, witchcraft, false gods, but we are riddled with them, so riddled with them now that they have become normative, and we don't even realize that they are idols, that they are witchcraft, that they are magic arts. We don't even realize that this holiday, not holy day, that the world celebrates supposedly to Christ, originated as a pagan holiday of absolute lawlessness. The holiday of Christmas was actually distressing to those who were not lawless. And that's the holiday that the world made to be Christ's birthday. And it is a more readily celebrated holiday among Christians than the actual holy days that God commanded in the Bible. How does that happen? Adultery with the earth, being double-minded, being lukewarm, fornicating with the enemy of God, being intoxicated with the wine of her adulteries. Then the angel carried me away in the spirit into the wilderness. There I saw a woman sitting on a scarlet beast that was covered with blasphemous names and had 7 heads and 10 horns. Again, I go into the 7 heads and 10 horns and 10 toes and all of these things that are described between Daniel and Revelation in the video entitled The United States and the End Times. Earlier on in this series on Revelation, I did tell you that the 10 horns, or in Daniel called the 10 toes, that those are kings. In a moment here, we're going to see what the 7 heads are. Verse 4, the woman was dressed in purple and scarlet and was glittering with gold, precious stones, and pearls. She held a golden cup in her hand, filled with the abominable things and the filth of her adulteries. The name written on her forehead was a mystery. So now this is a third time that we're seeing about forehead. There's God's name on our foreheads, God's name on our right hands. There's the mark of the beast on the forehead and the right hand. And here, Babylon the Great also has a name on her forehead, and it's Babylon the Great, the mother. A mother has children of prostitutes and of the abominations of the earth. She gave birth to these things, to these prostitutes. Now remember that a woman is a church, a mother is a woman, and this mother has prostitute daughters. The churches, the institution of churches that bore out of her, and of the abominations of the earth. All of those sins that continue to be committed, the adultery, the intoxication of false doctrine, the wine of her adulteries. Think about all of the filth that has bore out of that harlot, that is now coming out of the woodwork And we're seeing it in the prostitutes that bore out of her. The glory that she gave herself. Do you see that in these counterfeit churches? The glory that they give themselves? The false teachings, the returning to the law in order to collect tithes, the additions to the scroll, the sexual perversion, the oppression, the changing of God's appointed times, the changing of his Sabbath, the changing of his language. For example, using rapture instead of first resurrection. I mean, how's anyone supposed to understand the first resurrection when they can't even find rapture in the Bible? I was thinking the other day, where's missionary in the Bible? I don't see that word in the Bible. Do you? Why are we talking about missionaries? I was raised in the Mormon church, always talking about missionaries and going on a mission. Why are we talking about missionaries? How come we're not talking about disciples? So that we can understand what a disciple is, that a disciple is a student of God, that we're supposed to be students of God. Why aren't we talking about lamps, about being the light of the world and the lampstand that he's building so that we can understand how God actually builds our testimony through lived experience, through the experiences he's sending in our lives, not some training in an institution, some carnal, superficial teaching of the word, and all of the wives' tales and legends that we've been taught, that we've been peddled in counterfeit Christianity, like a third of heaven's angels went and followed Lucifer. Where's that? I demonstrated for you earlier in one of the videos when we were talking about Revelation 12, that's the one scripture when Satan's or the dragon's tail sweeps a third of the stars out of the sky. The timing of that isn't even the beginning. I mean, he has already been deceiving the earth by the time that happens. That happens at the time that Jesus is coming, where wickedness increases, where more demonic activity is taking place because he's upping the ante, because he's scared that his time is short, because the Lamb of God is required in order to triumph over him. And so the minute John the Baptist starts preaching, make straight paths for the Lord, the devil freaks out. And the kingdom of heaven is subjected to violence. That's what we're told in Matthew by Jesus. And so this whole story and fluff that we've been peddled about this fight between God and Lucifer is simply not true. He'd been placed in the Garden of Eden. His sin was when he deceived Eve in the Garden of Eden. He had been placed as a guardian cherub in the Garden of Eden. That is when wickedness was found in him. Where does this crazy story come from about the fight in heaven? He was placed in the garden of God and he sinned and he deceived Eve. And because of Eve's sin, a curse was placed on humanity. And because Adam was part of that, he partook in that, a curse was placed on males as well. So all of these legends and wives' tales and distortions and fluff that have been added to the scroll, why are they continuing to go around in other churches that bore out of her through the Reformation? I'll tell you why. Because their sin was that they were still focused on the Catholic Church, but they continue. And so they wanted to make a name for themselves by separating from the Catholic Church. But that was the wrong thing to do, was not to separate from the Catholic Church. The wrong thing to do was to try to make a name for themselves. What needed to happen is exactly what God has preached from the beginning until the end of the Bible, which is return to me. Speak on my authority for my glory. That's not what the reformists did. Reform is not the same as return. Return is God's command. I don't know what reform is. All I know is that it kept the focus on the Catholic Church and it continued in her abominations. The name written on her forehead was a mystery. Babylon the Great, the mother of prostitutes and of the abominations of the earth. I saw that the woman was drunk with the blood of God's holy people, the blood of those who bore testimony to Jesus. Is it difficult to conceive that this is papal Rome? All you got to do is look at the Spanish Inquisition. And one thing that you need to understand is that John has been carried away in the spirit to the time of atheistic communism, which is what Napoleon established. And so if you're listening to the United States in the end times, you're going to understand how it is that we know that, because of the description of these different kingdoms. And at that time, atheistic communism being the sixth beast, they had not yet been overthrown by Reagan and the Pope, the United States and the Pope, which was the seventh beast, the seventh kingdom that rose and is the false prophet. So keep that in mind. Write it in your little book so that you have that note and you can remember. Verse 6, I saw that the woman was drunk with the blood of God's holy people, the blood of those who bore testimony to Jesus. So Napoleon had a large part in overthrowing papal Rome and putting an end to this persecution of God's people, of Jews and of Christians alike. The main people that they went after were Christians because that's the threat. But they had forced Jews into ghettos. They were wearing yellow bonnets and, things to identify themselves and place shame on them. They were also killed. But the main threat to Satan are Christians, those who have accepted Christ, because he is the Antichrist. When I saw her, I was greatly astonished. Then the angel said to me, why are you astonished? I will explain to you the mystery of the woman and the beast she rides, which has the 7 heads and 10 horns. The beast, which you saw, once was, now is not, and yet will come out of the abyss and go to its destruction. One thing I want to say here is I always get tripped up on this because because it says, which you saw, once was, now is not, and yet will come up. Rome fell once, and sometimes I get tripped up and I say that it fell twice. Rome fell once, now is not, from the perspective of John, when he's on the island of Patmos, carried away in the spirit to the time of atheistic communism, and yet will come up out of the abyss and go to its destruction. So this is another reason we know that he's being carried away to the time of atheistic communism, because Rome had fallen, and yet will come out of the abyss to go to its destruction. The inhabitants of the earth whose names have not been written in the book of life from the creation of the world will be astonished when they see the beast, because it once was, now is not, and yet will come. This calls for a mind with wisdom. The 7 heads are 7 hills on which the woman sits. They are also 7 kings. 5 have fallen, 1 is, the other has not yet come, but when he does come, he must remain for only a little while. The beast who once was and now is not is the 8th king. He belongs to the 7 and is going to his destruction. Now, here's the thing. I'm not going to go back through this because I've already done a video and described this at length in United States and the End Times. What I can tell you, so that you can write this down, that I would say write this in your notebook so that as you're studying, you're able to make reference and the pieces will come together. The 7 hills, the 7 kings, the 7 heads, those are 7 kings. 5 have fallen, 1 is, the other has not yet come. The one that has not yet come is the United States. The 5 that have fallen is Babylon, which is portrayed as a lion in Daniel 7. Babylon was overthrown by Medo-Persia, and it was described as a bear in Daniel 7. It was seen as having 3 ribs in its mouth, which represented the countries it overthrew. Medo-Persia was then overthrown by Greece, and it was represented by a leopard in Daniel 7. It had 4 wings representing the swiftness with which Alexander the Great took everything, and it had 4 heads representing the 4 generals who took over the kingdom when he died. Greece then fell to pagan Rome. Papal Rome overthrew pagan Rome in 538 AD and ruled until 1798 AD. 5 have fallen, all of which, in John's point of view, are past. Because again, in John's point of view, he has been carried away to the time of atheistic communism. So papal Rome then fell to atheistic communism. Napoleon overthrew the papal power and established atheistic communism. That is the 6th beast. So 5 have fallen, 1 is, which is atheistic communism, and 1 is yet to come. So the one that was yet to come, in 1991, Reagan and the Pope overthrew communism And thus we have the beast that was to come, which is the United States, the seventh beast. The beast who once was, now is not, is the eighth king. Who is the beast that once was, now is not? Papal Rome. Papal Rome fell, and it will rise again as the Antichrist. He belongs to the seven and is going to his destruction. So we know that by process of elimination, and that's what I outlined for you in that video, by process of elimination, he's got to be one of those seven kings. And therefore, by process of elimination, you see exactly who it is. The beast that was has to eliminate atheistic communism in the United States because it had to have come before what he's now seeing, is himself also the eighth. So one of these five is the eighth. One of the five prior to atheistic communism. So what do we have? Babylon, Medo-Persia, Greece, pagan Rome, and papal Rome. It has to be one of those five kingdoms. There's a uniting of church and state because the harlot is riding the beast, and it had to have received a deadly wound that was healed. I mean, technically, all five of those received a deadly wound. They all fell. So uniting of church and state is one of the main clues. I mean, that makes or breaks it because papal Rome is the only kingdom that had this uniting of church and state. It's the only kingdom that continues to have a uniting of church and state, that has been able to get away with so many of this filthy sexual abuse because they have immunity. The Vienna Convention of April 18th, 1961 established diplomatic immunity for the Vatican's foreign diplomats. And that immunity can only be revoked by the Holy See. I don't see them doing that. Do you? That's the reason why they keep getting away with this, because they fornicate with the kings of the earth and because they have set themselves up as church and state. And the weird thing is that Francis says that God doesn't want combination of church and state. Does he not know what he represents? Papal Rome is the only one that fits all of these descriptions. The 10 kings in Daniel 7, Revelation 12, 13, and 17 represent the nations of Western Europe, and they will receive authority for 1 hour and will be in league with the papal power. These are of one mind, and they will give their power and authority to the beast, Revelation 17:3. They're not the same, but they're of one mind. And the reason why they're of one mind is because God has put it in their heart to fulfill the words that he has said. What's happening right now? What's happening with our military superpower that we're forming with these nations? Are we of one mind? Are we of one ideology? Because we keep calling it political ideology, and that is a big problem because we talk about political ideology and we act like it's separate from spiritual ideology. We act like there's not a spirit that is involved in that there is an antichrist spirit that is motivating that ideology. Now remember that in Revelation 13:12, that we saw that the United States exercised all the authority of the first beast, which is papal Rome, on its behalf, and made the earth and its inhabitants worship the first beast, whose fatal wound had been healed, and it performed great signs, even causing fire to come down from heaven to the earth in full view of people. So the United States is going to give power and authority into papal Rome. Because of the signs it was given power to perform on behalf of the first beast, it deceived the inhabitants of the earth. It ordered them, the United States, to set up an image in honor of the beast, who was wounded by the sword and yet lived. The second beast was given power to give breath, life, to the image of the first beast, so that the image could speak and cause, or force, all who refuse to worship the image to be killed. Now, many have said that these are religious laws that are going to go into effect. I don't know that that's true. I'm not sure if this is going to be legislated or if on a different level, there are going to be other things that are legislated that are going to represent certain deeds that God's people cannot participate in. And it might not even be legislated. You know what I'm saying? Like, I know one thing for me, and you may have experienced this yourself, but once you're in Christ, you don't have the same kind of relationships with people in the world. And it's not just because something has changed in you that you just choose not to, like, engage with those people. You're going to see that they choose not to engage with you. And that's biblical. It's not just my personal experience or my testimony. It's biblical. Jesus says that those who live in darkness will not come towards the light because they're afraid of being exposed. So they'll start turning away. They'll have superficial conversations with you, but they'll, kind of try to get away from you. You may even find that they just drop off, like for no good reason. There was no falling out or anything like that. They just, no contact anymore. The reason I mention that is because it may become difficult for you to have business associations and things like that. You're not of one mind with them anymore. You're not of the mind of the world anymore. And so Satan starts stirring something up in them, just as God who occupies you stirs things up in you. And Satan causes them to hide, to have discord and chaos. And truly, you can't really do business with those people anymore. So I don't know what this is going to look like, but we need to cast a wide net, because if we're, getting locked into a story that the world has told us, or that counterfeit Christianity has just added all of this fluff and story to it, or that the Catholic Church put out in order to take the focus off of them, because they've done quite a bit of that, we're not going to understand. And you see in the word that it keeps saying, this calls for a mind with wisdom. By the way, it's calling for a mind with wisdom. It's not suggesting a mind with wisdom. It is calling for a mind with wisdom. We have to be wise, because if we're not, we'll be fools. And we're not going to recognize. So, for example, if you think that the temple has to be built in Jerusalem, if you think that the mark of the beast has to go on literally on your forehead and your hand, if you think that the Antichrist is literally a man, which is false doctrine that the Catholic Church put out in order to take the focus off of them, how are you going to recognize what's going on? This has to be discerned by the Holy Spirit. There's no way for us to separate from him and then just, say, oh, okay, got it from here. I have all the info in my little notebook. Because frankly, the mark of the beast beginning in the heart was something that God built understanding about that with me 3 years ago. 3 years ago, he was talking with me about that. I had no idea how he was going to cause this to unfold and help me to understand. I mean, have you ever heard anyone put that together, that the mark of the beast starts in your heart? That, Jesus said you're defiled by what goes into your heart. That Paul said you're going to be justified by what's in your heart. That the mark of the beast is coming through your right hand and your forehead and your declarations. And hello, that makes sense, because that would be the way that we're living if we're actually living our faith. It would be coming through our deeds, our thoughts, and our declarations. Not just our declarations when we're being asked, do you believe in Jesus Christ? I'm talking about what it is that we talk about. I don't talk anywhere near the way that I used to talk when I was in the world. This is what I talk about, because this is all that matters. Okay, so let's go back to Revelation 17. The 10 horns you saw, this is verse 12. The 10 horns you saw are 10 kings who have not received a kingdom, but who for 1 hour will receive authority as kings along with the beast. They have one purpose and will give their power and authority to the beast. They will wage war against the Lamb, but the Lamb will triumph over them, because he is Lord of lords and King of kings, and with him will be his called, chosen, and faithful followers. Then the angel said to me, the waters you saw where the prostitute sits, now write this down in your book, the waters. So if you're seeing the sea, or you're seeing the waters, things like this in Revelation or in the Word, you need to understand that those are peoples, multitudes, nations, and languages. Those are the waters where this prostitute sits. Does the Catholic Church sit near peoples, multitudes, nations, and languages? This is a universal church. That's what Catholicism stands for. They have been allowed to have universal power so that God's words would be fulfilled. Don't mistake that. Don't think that Satan did that. Satan can't do anything that God doesn't let him do. This is to fulfill God's words. And that is why God is now pulling people out, his people, out of the nations. That is why there's going to be a multitude in white robes of different peoples, nations, and languages who will be saved, who will serve God before his throne. The beast and the 10 horns you saw will hate the prostitute. They will bring her to ruin and leave her naked. They will eat her flesh and burn her with fire. For God has put it into their hearts to accomplish his purpose by agreeing to hand over to the beast their royal authority until God's words are fulfilled. So they are all going to give her their power. Why? In order for God's words to be fulfilled. And the other thing you need to understand is that Satan gets his jollies off of killing, stealing, and destroying. And pay attention, because he does this with his own people, with his own kingdom. He destroys his own kingdom. Remember that Jesus said a kingdom divided against itself cannot stand. And that is true. His kingdom, Satan's kingdom, will not stand. Verse 18, the woman you saw is the great city that rules over the kings of the earth. I mean, you can kind of fathom that, right? Papal Rome has a lot of power and a lot of influence. And the kings of the earth pad their pockets fornicating with this harlot. There's great glory and notoriety and money to be had from associating with this harlot. And that all has influence, doesn't it? It's interesting that people like John Kerry would go to the Pope and elicit his help. There's an inherent acknowledgement there of the incredible power and influence that this harlot has in the world. They justify themselves by her. They get rich. These merchants, that's part of the way that the word describes those who associate with her. We're going to see in the next chapter that it says, for all the nations have drunk the maddening wine of her adulteries. The kings of the earth committed adultery with her, and the merchants of the earth grew rich from her excessive luxuries. We can see that this happens. We can see this happening already. I was sort of astonished the other day. I was listening to a priest get his sentencing in court, and the judge, for some odd, creepy reason, felt the need to give a whole speech on how that priest was not being condemned for the sins of other priests, of what other priests have done. I mean, when have you seen like a serial killer, the judge like come to bat for them and say, I want to make sure that everybody knows that they're not bearing the consequences of every other serial killer. And that is so weird. It's such a weird thing to do, to give a whole speech around that. The guy's a pedophile. Lock him up. I think everyone is intelligent enough to understand that he's been condemned. He's been found guilty for his own offenses, which, by the way, are plenty. It was the most bizarre thing. And the only thing that I can assume is that he either was a Catholic himself or he felt some sort of political pressure to make that declaration, to make that speech. Because why else would you do that? Give this huge disclaimer. In any event, all the nations have drunk the maddening wine of her adulteries. They all celebrate her holidays. They all preach that counterfeit Christianity, celebrate that counterfeit Christianity that won't save. The kings of the earth committed adultery with her, and the merchants of the earth grew rich from her excessive luxuries. They are all getting something from this prostitute. I hope these videos are helping. If you would, please let me know in the comments section, how are these helping you? What would you like more of? What do you want to understand? What are your questions? Is this picture becoming clear? Because I know that part of the reason there was a request for Revelation, for a study of Revelation, is because it's a challenging book to understand. So the point of these videos is to make it clear for you, to help you. But again, it's got to be by the Spirit of God. So please make sure that you're discerning, that you're sitting with him, and that you're praying to understand, is this true? Are these true interpretations of the book of Revelation? But I would really appreciate it if you would comment and let me know how this is going for you. Thanks so much for listening. God bless you, and I'll see you in the next video.